Record turnout in Georgia. Yeah. How are you feeling about specifically this state Supreme Court race? And, you know, you want to make any predictions about the Democratic side of the governor's race? We'll take them at this table.
Punditry is not what I do. But look, the massive turnout that we're seeing, the historic turnout, that's good news. And quite frankly, it's the answer to, or part of the answer to what we're seeing with this voter suppression, with this awful decision, the gerrymanders that are happening all across the South. Part of the answer to that is massive turnout. The gerrymandering is based on predictions about turnout based on previous races. We've got to undermine that math, and I think we've got some real opportunities. I think the Republicans may have overreached here. And what you're witnessing is a kind of backlash. The voters are standing up. They're saying, you will not silence our voice.
You know, they changed the rules, Alicia, in Georgia. The governor did. So the Democratic counties, the ballots don't say if the candidate is Democrat or Republican.
This gerrymander, what's at stake for your constituents?
So what was that?
What is at stake for your constituents?
In terms of gerrymandering?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, look, we're seeing a massive, devastating assault on voting rights. It's hard to overstate it. I mean, we've got Section 2 with this gerrymandering. But prior to that, the legacy of the Roberts Court, in a real sense, is the dismantling of our electoral system. The Supreme Court has done a lot of damage. This Roberts Court, Section 2 in 2013, Section 5, Citizens United, all of these things. We're not just talking about black voters. We're talking about working class voters, ordinary people, either through suppression or gerrymandering, which says that even when you show up, it won't mean as much. In a real sense, they're setting fire to the democracy, and the Supreme Court is pouring fuel on that fire, and we have to stand up in this moment. I'm proud of all that we did when I first entered the Senate. It was the 117th Congress. We passed a lot of legislation. We cut child poverty by 40% for 6 months. We did infrastructure. We did, clean energy, the biggest clean energy bill in human history. Whole lot of good coming right out of the pandemic. I have to tell you, looking at what's happening to our democracy right now, it was a mistake not to take voting rights first, to get John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act over the finish line. I'm proud of all that work we did. If I could, I'd trade all of that for the democracy, for the people's voices.
Because at the end of the day, if you can't vote, none of the policy matters.
Yes, right. But it sounds like you're endorsing getting rid of the filibuster. I just want to, that's the point.
Yeah, but you got to get the Senate to do that.
Yeah, well, we had every Democrat on that bill, on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement bill. It passed the House. At the end of the day, it was literally 2 senators, neither of whom is no longer is in the Senate now. And I think the caucus is on board. If we are so fortunate that the people will put us back into power, we owe it to the people to give them their voice. That's basic. It's foundational. And no arcane Senate procedural rule should block people's ability to be heard in their democracy.
You talk about the caucus, the Democratic caucus for sure, but then there's also the Congressional Black Caucus, which, going back to what you were saying about they're putting a lot of gasoline on the flames. Well, a lot of members of the CBC could be burned in this. Yeah. You've got a potential crisis, as noted in Politico this November. Upward of 19 members of the caucus, about 1/3 of its ranks, are at risk of losing their seats. A worst-case scenario could look like the complete erasure of black representation across the South, according to 10 CBC members who spoke with the Playbook. It's a generational moment, CBC lawmakers compared to the Reconstruction era and civil rights movement, and is testing how far the caucus will be willing to go to preserve their political might. Senator, we're talking about a Congress of the United States that could look the way it did in 1954, right, in 1945 in the South. Yeah. Where you've got a handful of black folk who are left over, whose state legislatures, I guarantee you, will redistrict their behinds out of office if they...
Democrat of Massachusetts is joining me now and surveying all of this. What do you think about this fundamental dynamic that we now have of Trump's grip on the Republican Party sort of arguably stronger even maybe than it's ever been. Grip on the country weaker, and what that means for what happens.
So it's a tighter and tighter hold on a smaller and smaller group.
Yeah. Yes.
So but that was really the point. I've heard the commentators say, and the people decided they didn't want to support Massey. No. Right. The people who showed up at a Republican primary decided they didn't want him to be their standard bearer. You know, if this had been an open, anybody votes. If this had been a general, I don't know exactly how that goes.
Right.
But I think this is the part. It's interesting to watch, and to watch what the dynamic will be on Republicans who say, man, I'm not crossing that guy, on the elected Republicans. We know who they belong to. But the reality is we're 5 months out. We're going to have a general election, and boy, is that going to start shaking things.
So there's a bunch of cross pressure. I mean, right now we're already seeing the fallout in the Senate today.
Yeah.
Right? In a few different ways. I want to talk. One way was there was a war power resolution today. And for the first time, Democrats' party line, except for John Fetterman, have been voting for it. Republicans have been voting against it, except for Rand Paul. Those two have been switching. Today, Bill Cassidy, fresh off that loss on Saturday, crossed the line and voted with you and your colleagues to put it over the hump, which means it will now call a vote, is how I understand the procedure. What do you make of that development, and also what it portends for this Senate for the next 4 or 5
Well, could you say more clearly that if I'd been voting my conscience all along, I would not have been voting with Donald Trump?
Talk about a confession. I mean, it's really wild.
It's just like a moment of just now we can see what's really going on. And so you look at all the other guys who are still voting in line with Donald Trump. You watch these election results, and look, there's no voter who's going to be fooled after today, right? Is there anybody left who thinks that there is an elected Republican who is actually voting his conscience, doing what he thinks is best for all of the people of his district? How does he stand up in front of the electorate for the next 5.5 months as he faces the general electorate and say, you know what matters most to me? And with a straight face says, you, rather than pleasing Donald Trump.
Well, and I think there's a strange kind of coincidence.
Trump Republicans just suffered a brutal Senate election defeat that is sending shockwaves through Washington tonight. What was supposed to be a comfortable Republican hold has now turned into a political disaster that could completely reshape the balance of power heading into the next election cycle. Democrats are celebrating this race as proof that the political landscape is shifting fast, while Republicans are scrambling to explain how a race they once believed was safe suddenly slipped out of their hands. The loss is already triggering panic inside conservative circles because this was not just another random Senate race. Party strategists viewed this election as a key test of Trump's political influence, Republican voter enthusiasm, and the strength of MAGA messaging in critical battleground territory. Instead, the result exposed major cracks inside the Republican coalition at the worst possible time. For months, Trump allies insisted voters were lining up behind Republican candidates because of growing frustration over inflation, immigration, and the economy. Conservative media repeatedly claimed a massive red wave was building. But when the votes were finally counted, Republicans found themselves facing an outcome few expected. Democrats managed to outperform polling in several key areas, especially among suburban voters, independents, and younger turnout groups. Exit polls showed many voters who previously supported Republicans shifted away this time because of concerns over extremism, election denial rhetoric, and ongoing political chaos surrounding Trump-backed figures. This defeat is especially damaging because Republicans poured enormous resources into this race. Millions of dollars flooded into advertising campaigns, rallies, and voter outreach operations. Trump himself heavily promoted Republican momentum leading up to Election Day, framing the race as a must-win battle to save the country. Now critics are pointing directly at Trump's influence as a possible reason the party failed. Inside Republican leadership circles, frustration is growing rapidly tonight. Some GOP strategists are privately admitting the party may have miscalculated voter priorities. While Republicans focused heavily on national culture war issues, Democrats centered their messaging around healthcare, abortion rights, and protecting democratic institutions. Early analysis suggests those issues may have resonated far more strongly with swing voters than Republicans anticipated. What makes this loss even more dangerous for Republicans is the timing. Meanwhile, Democrats are calling this election a major rejection of MAGA politics. Party leaders argue voters are becoming exhausted with non-stop political drama and are looking for stability instead of confrontation. Progressive activists are now energized, believing this victory could trigger momentum heading into future Senate and presidential contests. Political analysts are already saying this race could become one of the defining warning signs for Republicans before the next national election. The biggest concern for the GOP is that the same voting patterns seen here are emerging in multiple battleground states across the country. If suburban voters continue drifting away from Trump-style candidates, Republicans could face serious problems in races they once expected to win easily. The result is also reigniting internal Republican divisions that never fully disappeared after previous election disappointments. Establishment Republicans are once again debating whether the party needs to move beyond Trump's influence to attract moderate voters. MAGA supporters, however, are blaming weak campaign strategies and insufficient loyalty to Trump's agenda. Tonight's defeat could intensify that civil war inside the GOP even further. Democrats, on the other hand, now see an opportunity to expand their Senate strategy nationwide. Party operatives believe this victory proves they can still compete effectively even in races where Republicans expected favorable conditions. One of the most surprising developments from the election was turnout. Republicans expected lower Democratic enthusiasm, but instead Democratic voters showed up in massive numbers in several critical counties. Independent voters also broke in unexpected directions late in the race, ultimately helping push Democrats across the finish line. Conservative commentators are already warning that Republicans may be underestimating voter backlash against controversial candidates tied too closely to Trump's election conspiracy. The pressure on Trump is likely to intensify after this result. Every Republican defeat tied to Trump-backed messaging adds more ammunition to critics inside the party who argue that his political brand energizes Democratic turnout just as much as it motivates Republican voters. This election loss may also impact Senate control calculations in Washington. A single seat can dramatically affect committee power, judicial confirmations, legislative priorities, and the balance of influence in Congress. That's why Democrats are treating tonight's outcome as far more than just a symbolic victory. Republicans now face a difficult reality. The political environment they believed favored them may not be as secure as they thought. Rising divisions, candidate controversies, and changing voter coalitions are creating serious uncertainty about the future of the party. As reactions continue pouring in tonight, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: this Senate election was not just another race. It may have fundamentally changed the political conversation heading into the next major national showdown. And for Trump Republicans, the fallout is only beginning.